Hi, this is Natalie Hoffman of FlyingFreeNow.com, and you're listening to the Flying Free Podcast, a support resource for women of faith looking for hope and healing from hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. Welcome to episode 67 of the Flying Free Podcast. Today we're going to be talking with Dave Orrison. He is a pastor. He's been a pastor for 42 years. He's currently serving a congregation in Drake, Colorado. Happily married man with 8 sons. I want to ask you a little bit about that in a minute because that's pretty fascinating. He has a website called gracefortheheart.org. So when we're done with this interview, if you want to go and see some of the things that he's written and subscribe to his articles, you can do that. gracefortheheart.org. Today we're going to be talking about the link between legalism and narcissism. And so, Dave, first of all, let's go back to that 8 boys thing, and then I want you to tell us why you got into researching and studying and diving into this world of legalism and narcissism. And I'm fascinated to know how you link the two of them. I mean, I've seen that as well in my own experience, but just finding out how you are making those connections is going to be really interesting. So first of all, the 8 boys. Tell us about that.
We have 8 sons. We have, I think the oldest is 42 and the youngest is 23. And we used to tell people, and anybody with a big family probably understands this, they'd say, well, how old are your kids? And we'd say, well, pick an age,
Right.
And all their names start with J, which just drove people nuts.
Oh, wow. How could you even remember all of that?
Yeah, we just go by numbers,
That's hilarious. So how many grandkids do you have?
Just 2. Yep. I got another one on the way. So, yep. And guess what? A girl is on the way. An actual Orrison girl. We're pretty excited. So
your first 2 grandkids were boys also.
Well, we have a little adopted girl, basically stepdaughter. Okay. And so she's there, but wasn't born into the family. I did say, I told my son, I'm really glad that he connected with her so we could learn to love her. Because I said, I was always afraid that I was too big to be wrapped around a little finger.
Oh, that is hilarious.
Now she's taught me how to wrap around a little finger, and I'm good.
That's awesome.
She's
well,
sweet.
And I bet your wife is really grateful too to have a little.
Oh yeah, she's always really enjoyed the boys, and she's kind of a tomboyish person herself. She loves outdoors and she loves boy things, and so it's been really good. She's really enjoyed the guys, and we've even gotten a comment which. Again, if you walked in our circles, you would understand a little bit better. But somebody said, Mrs. Orrison talks with her boys. That was like a revelation, It was well, yes, as a matter of fact.
That's bizarre. Why wouldn't you talk with your boys? Why?
Well, we had families that just, if mom didn't connect with the boys, then the boys are pretty much on their own, and that's what we saw, and that's a little bit of the patriarchal part of the legalists and the Bill Gothard stuff that we were in. There's a little bit of boys will be okay because they're boys, and so mom's focused on girls, and it was very under, it wasn't ever spoken. It was never something that was taught,
right?
But it was an undercurrent, and those undercurrents are, they're powerful.
Yep.
They have a lot to do with expectations and comparisons. And so we actually she got a comment one time. Mrs. Orrison actually talks with her boys.
That's very
wow. That was from mom.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
so we've had quite a life.
It's tragic though, because when you think about all of the richness of relationships that get lost because of our preconceived ideas of the relationships between men and women and boys and girls, and our view of each other is so twisted and warped. It's really sad.
It really is. And I think, how do I say this? We have the desire to go with the easiest path even though it's hard. And so looking for a system to do our work for us is pretty natural, right?
Yeah.
You know, if somebody says, okay, here's how to raise kids. I mean, you look back, just take the last 30 years, how many different systems have come up on how to raise kids.
Yep. Yep.
And why? You know, well, partly because people are afraid, and partly because people are just plain lazy. The relationships are work. They're hard sometimes, and sometimes, you know, we've homeschooled all these years, and sometimes you feel like you'd just rather go bang your head against the wall than take another minute of homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect there's a lot of people feeling that right now.
Yes. Yes. I homeschooled for 20 years, and I haven't now for the last probably 5. And we're back at it again. And yeah, I don't really miss it, I have to say.
Yeah, and that doesn't downplay the good times. I mean, there certainly were some benefits and some good times in all of it.
Yeah.
But relationships are work, and the closer they are, the more work they are.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, and I'm not downgrading anybody when I say it's easier in some aspects to send your kids off to school and have a free day, because homeschooling moms never get a free day, right? There's never a break, and those are hard things. And I think if we could find something that would be easier, ship our kids off to some camp, or do something, or have a system, and then we know, where we've failed, or what's happening, or what we ought to do. Seems easier anyway. It doesn't. The problem, of course, is that it doesn't work. You just keep needing new systems,
right?
But
Well, and I think that's because people, human beings, whether they're 80, 40, or 4, are individuals, and they need they require wisdom in interacting with them. And when you have everybody in the same box, whichever, pick a box, when you put everyone in the same box and run them through the same grid, some of them are going to be fine, and some of them are not. Some of them aren't going to be fine. They're not going to fit in that box. They're not going to fit in that grid. And if we as Christians aren't willing to go and look to God for wisdom, and look at ourselves and the ways we're reacting to our children, that specific child who's extra challenging or whatever, and look for answers, then we're going to run into more problems, and we are going to beat our heads against the wall.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Or bang the kid's head against the wall.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's the frustrating part, is you get angry when you get, frustrated, and you're not able to make that communication happen. Then that turns into anger, and that has another whole cost to it. But I think, when and my wife went through this, she homeschooled, let's see, 1, 2, I'm counting down here, 5 kids in a row, and then hit one whose learning style was very different. Mm-hmm. Well, you've got 5 that are still in process of learning their way, right? I mean, learning, they're all doing about the same thing, and all of a sudden there's this one who has to have some special attention and has to be off, doing something else. That's challenging. Yep. That's hard. And especially, as you know, if you've got little ones coming up besides, it's a dynamic that's difficult. So, it goes back to, whenever we have something that's difficult, the desire to have a system or a formula to make it easy is pretty strong.
Yep. Well, and when people make that promise and say, here, if you do this, this, and this, you will be growing your kids God's way.
Right.
Like, oh, well, I want to grow my kids God's way, not
exactly.
my way, so I better do those things.
Yeah, I know. As opposed to whose way? I mean, who else's way are we going to choose? Right?
Exactly. That was a genius marketing.
Oh,
tool, by the
absolutely. Way. And a classic legalist move, right?
Yes, exactly.
A classic legalist
God
move.
says so.
God says this. Well, I think that's right, because with that comes the guarantee, right?
Right.
And the trap. Because the guarantee is such that if you do this, 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 God will give you this, this, this. Yep. Now, if God's not giving you this, then we have to look at why. And the why will always be your failure.
Yes.
You did not do the system the way it's supposed to be done, because the system is holy. It's God's system. And so around and around it goes. And it's no wonder people come out of there feeling discouraged and defeated, unworthy, shamed, all those words that come along with that. So,
Yeah. It's definitely a flawed system. So, what is the link between all of that? I mean, a lot of people that are listening to this are, most of them are women, and most of them are women of faith, and most of them are women of the Christianity version of faith. So, and I've seen every denomination in that version,
sure,
across the board. But they've come out of that legalistic thinking. So they're very familiar with that. And if any of you who are listening who are not familiar with that, thank your lucky stars. But most of them are familiar with that, and they are still trying to deprogram from some of that thinking, because it's been ingrained in them that they've got it intertwined with their idea of who God is. And so
right.
and so for them to have faith in God means to have faith in this whole system also. And we have to somehow extricate who God is from the system that they've bought into. But I'm fascinated to know what the link is between legalism and narcissism, which is something that you've done a lot of work with. And I know you have a lot of articles about narcissism in the church. You've written a book called, I think it's called Narcissism in the Church.
Narcissism in the Church, yeah.
Yeah. And so what is, is that everybody that's legalistic a narcissist? I mean, how do you tell me about that?
Right. And let me step back and kind of explain the journey that I went through to get into this. And hopefully I can do that just, fairly short. I was a pastor in the Presbyterian church for several years, and a conservative in a liberal group felt very uncomfortable, came into the evangelical church thinking, oh boy, this is going to be great, and bottom line, found the same politics, the same compromises, the same frustrations, but just a little bit better defined system of faith, right? So at least evangelicals said they knew what they believed. Then a few years later, we were introduced to Gothard stuff. And in Gothard stuff, I found people who were very serious about their faith. They knew what they believed. They dedicated themselves to what they believed. It was very attractive for somebody like me coming out of the liberal church with a conservative, what shall I say, background or belief system. And so the Gothard thing looked like it was just, serious Christians, serious about their faith. And it had that attraction for us and for our family. Now, that's right at the time that we're also starting our family. We've got some little kids, and so, we're pulling them in, trying to figure out how in the world do we protect them in this crazy world. And there, what do you know? There's a system. And it looked good. And even though we sort of went in with our eyes open, the system had still some pretty hidden parts. What's one of the tenets of legalism is you never quite find out the whole story, right? I always say that once you find out what you're doing wrong and then change, so that you're starting to do something right according to that, then they come up with another thing you're doing wrong.
Right.
So you can never win in that system. It always continues to change. It's kind of like the secret organization that demands commitment, serious commitment, before they tell you their secrets. You have to believe their secrets before they'll tell you them. And so Gothardism was that. Legalism was that. No, I'm not going to equate legalism and Gothardism. Gothardism is, the teachings of Bill Gothard were an example of legalism at work. Somewhat extreme, I suppose. Not as extreme as many of the cult groups, although certainly almost there. I would say cultic, if you will. So I began to look at what in the world was going on, and realized that this whole thing was about performance. So I talk about performance spirituality. It's all based on the quality and quantity of my performance. In other words, if I do well enough, and again, both quantity and quality, then God will notice me and bless me. If I do enough good things and I do them in the right way, God will notice me and bless me. And I mean, as well as I do, if you read the Bible with that grid in place, you'll find support for that system. You'll find proof texts that tell you that same message over and over. It's like, if you do well, you'll be blessed. And so legalism has its roots in the Bible, but it's because of a certain grid of. Do you understand what I mean by grid? I don't know if everyone will. Let's say a preconceived impression, a prejudice. That has other taints, but
well, like a pair of glasses. You're putting on a pair of
yes,
glasses that have a certain color, and then you look around you, and everything has that color, that hue of color.
right. And certain colors get washed out because of those same glasses.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you see some things more and you see other things less. And yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. So there are scripture passages that support the legalism, and that's why a lot of people who leave legalism also leave their faith in the scriptures, and they don't want to read the Bible anymore. I've had people say, I just can't read the Bible without seeing that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And my standard response to that is, well, then don't. Pray.
Oh, can I jump in here and say something?
Sure.
You know what? Bingo. Because I was an avid Bible reader for, my whole entire life. I grew up in that conservative family where you read your Bible through every year, did lots of Bible studies, went to a Bible school, blah, blah, blah. So I loved the Bible, and my journals are full of Bible verses and my skewed thinking about what they were saying. But I literally had to set my Bible aside for probably 2 or 3 years. I am just now, and I pick it up once in a while and look at it, and then I put it back down again and go, you know what? I'm still not ready. I just recently have started picking it up again now with a different pair of glasses on my face, and I am reading it through a different grid, and it is incredibly different. It's like I'm reading a completely different book. It's so bizarre.
Yes. Amen. I believe God will lead you back to the Bible, because my personal belief is that that's His given word. He has desired for us to read the Bible, but I don't think He ever wanted us to read the Bible for the Bible. He didn't want us to look for the Bible in the Bible. And that's what we were taught. That's what evangelicals have been taught. And that's clearly what the legalist is taught. We're supposed to go from one proof text to another, find deeper and deeper support in the scriptures for the ideas that we have. And so we look to the Bible for the Bible. But when you look to the Bible for Jesus, I get on my soapbox, my preaching,
love this
thing here. But when you look in the Bible for Jesus, you'll find Him also. It's just that you're looking for a different thing. I always tell people, when you do get called back to the Bible, go to the book of John and look at how Jesus loved people. Just look for just that. Don't look at anything else. Yes. Look at how Jesus loved people, because it's all through there. And all of a sudden, it starts to open up this idea of who Jesus is and who God is, and you get a different perspective.
Amen.
A different grid. Now I look back in the Bible, and I look back in the Old Testament, and some of the stuff that's, it seems so restrictive, so law-based, and I think, why did God give us the law? He gave us the law because He loves us. So let's look at even the law from that perspective of Him loving us, not as a book of rules, but as the same kind of love that we would say if your kids are off in college and you write something that just is on your heart for them. It would be the same type of communication, right? You don't want them to look and say, okay, what does Mom want us to do now? You want them to hear the love in your heart as you write to them. Right. And yes, that might have some specifics. But the point of those specifics is the love from your heart. So if we could look back, even in the Old Testament, and start seeing how God loved his people, how he loved them from the beginning and how he took care of them. And boy, I tell you what, it opens the scripture in ways the legalists never heard of, sadly.
Yeah.
Sad. It is very sad. And I think that's kind of the point. Legalism makes the Bible a book of rules, a almost a math book in the way that they do cause and effect, and certainly a book full of of the if you do this then you're going to get this, and then they look for the proof text. So it becomes this whole book of rules and that kind of focus. God, of course, is the judge, the policeman, the great critic, who knows every detail of our lives and judges us. Jesus, at the very best, is some kind of mediator who holds God off, right? so the message is that God wants to zap you and send you to hell forever, but Jesus holds him back.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes I call that, I've written an article and I call that's the abuser God that we
Yes. Yeah.
It's not the true God. It's
not the true God.
And when we worship an abuser God and we think that that's the way God is, we actually find ourselves behaving in similar ways towards other people then. Instead of
exactly.
Like Christ.
Yep. Because authority does filter down, whether we like it or not. The one that we lift up and look toward, even if in our heart we hate them and are afraid of them and would like to push them away, the one we put up in authority is still the model.
Yep.
Still the one that we pattern our lives off of. And I've told this to people over the years that we will, as parents, we will either consciously do differently than our parents, or we will unconsciously do the same thing. Mm-hmm. So we have the same types of anger expressions often that our parents do. We have the same type of marriage relationships often that our parents do, unless we purposely and consciously do different, which we can. But in times of stress, we often don't stop and think that one through. Same thing in our relationship with God. If you think God is an abuser, if God is violent and angry, then you can justify your own anger and your own violence by appealing to God.
And people do.
And people do. And I think legalism is all that in a package. And from that legalism, from that idea of God being this performance-oriented being who looks down on us and wants to see how well we're behaving so that he can reward us or punish us on the basis of our performance. He's the foreman, in the sky, or like I say, the policeman. As long as we do that, we create a system. And that, to me, that's the legalist system. That's the system under the law, which is performance-based. Out of that comes guilt and shame, fear and failure, judgment. I mean, all these things come out of that. Comparisons. And I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but the comparisons within the legalist system that, I've said it this way: I may not be as good as Jesus, but I can be better than you. Right? I can be better than you in some areas. And so we maybe talked about this before, but the homeschool marketing system, which I tried to explain to people, is a true marketing system. I never forget the magazines this would be now from quite a few years ago, but I think it was Teaching Home magazine, had always a family on the cover, right? And it's like these parents with 12 kids. All the kids are dressed alike. They're all smiling. They're holding their violins because they all play violin, and everybody is so happy. I got in front of a homeschool group, 20 years ago probably, and I said, you know what? I've known a lot of those families, and I know how incredibly miraculous it was to get that single picture.
Right. Right.
But they always, that was the thing, and right there on the cover of the magazine was, if you get our magazine and you read our articles and you buy our products, you can have a family like this. Look at the control.
Yeah.
Look at the joy. Right?
That's what I was just thinking just now. I believe me, I remember those magazines. I remember one family I found out later, the dad had actually gone off and had an affair with his secretary and got her pregnant and ended up marrying her. So here's the thing I never realized back then is that to get all of those kids to be interested in, like, what are the odds that everyone in a family has this passion for violin, for example?
Right.
Not
exactly.
good.
Not good.
There is coercion, there's power and control over the lives of children that they have to do one thing based on what the patriarch in the family is telling them to do, and they're actually not able to exercise their own God-given bent, their own God-given gifts and
right.
and trajectory in life, because they're being dictated by the patriarch, who's basically standing in the place of God and saying, no, I don't care how God created you. This is what you're going to do. You're going to do what I want you to do. And we're going to look amazeballs and we're going to be on the cover of a magazine and everyone's going to want to be like us. But behind the scenes, I can almost guarantee that those families were not peace-filled, and those kids,
right.
Pretty sure that all of those kids did not grow up to play the violin and, be violin virtuosos.
Yeah, exactly. And I've known many of those families, and that same scenario repeats. That they've got 2 or 3 kids perhaps that have just wandered. Because how could and if you don't mind me picking on one thing, it wasn't always patriarch, right? Sometimes mom was the driving force.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
I know dads who would not ever have gotten into homeschooling simply because they didn't want to deal with it. But mom was the one who wanted to look good. So they had to perform well in order to look good, because performance is all about how you look, right? We want, it's like when the narcissistic boss comes in, all the employees work hard at looking like they're working hard. The appearance is everything. And that's true in legalism, that's true in narcissism. So what you described just now, the patriarch who says, okay, everybody's going to play the violin, is a system where individualism is discounted. People are depersonalized, right? We don't care who you are as a person. All we care about is how you represent the family, particularly the dad or the mom, but how you represent us. That's all we care about. Now, that is narcissistic abuse.
You're right. It is.
See?
I get it now. I get the link.
It's an easy step from one to the other at that point.
And that's why it probably really attracts people who have narcissistic tendencies.
Exactly. So
now they have the approval of God for their narcissistic worldview.
Right. I mean, what's better than holy narcissism?
Oh my gosh, what a perfect storm.
So if you look at a legalistic church, take your standard legalistic church, and by the way, that's also on a sliding scale, right? So there are churches that are very friendly and very gracious and only narcissistic or legalistic under the surface. You often people don't find this out until later. But you have what I guess I would lump three groups of people in the legalistic church. The first group that I would address would be the abusers, right? The users, the ones who come in to lead all these sheep. The second group, of course, are the sheep. They want to be led. They want to give their responsibilities and as much of their work in life as possible over to the ones who lead them. Don't tell me that I have to, go to the Lord and try to figure out what He wants me to do next. Just tell me what to do next, and then I'll do that. And so the legalistic system offers that, and people like that. They're already filled with fear. They're already filled with the idea that they'll never measure up. They expect to fail. They almost expect rejection and abuse. Something that you said earlier, I'm trying to think what it was, but basically that we all. Oh, I know. You were saying that we need a different view of God, and that it's hard to come out of legalism because our view of God is so damaged, right, by that, but also our view of ourselves.
Yes.
And chances are that people in legalistic churches grew up in legalistic churches. Now, that's not always the case, of course, but chances are that they grew up in legalistic churches, or at least grew up in a performance system where you were valued if you did what mom and dad said. If you didn't do what mom and dad said, then you were rejected. That's something that every parent has to deal with, I think, in a conscious way. How do you discipline your kids without making them feel rejected? Because I think it's the natural process to think that discipline means rejection.
Right.
Right? So how do we do that? And frankly, most of our parents never even asked the question.
Right.
You know, they just did it. And go to your room and be alone. Get a spanking, get physical pain from the one who says they love you. Those things are very difficult for children to understand, and parents need to go the extra 100 miles really to make sure that somehow discipline and welcome or acceptance don't negate each other. You have to love your kids, and you have to discipline them. Both are the case.
Yeah, and can I just jump in and share one
Mm-hmm.
little thing here, just in case there's any women, because I can hear women. I can hear what they're thinking.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
some of them are thinking, "How do you do that?" And so, I mean, I have my own ideas of how I've done that. That I'll just quick share, and then I'm interested to know how you would also do that. But
yeah,
the thing that I've learned about kids is that you can actually, if you look at all of the things that they love and that they, the privileges that you give to them and the things that make their life happy, you can actually take away those things without taking away your love. So you can say, and then you can give your kids the choice. Like you get to make, because our kids are going to grow up as adults and be able to make choices about how they want to live their lives. So
right.
they need to understand that while they may make a wrong choice, they will lose something wonderful if they make a wrong choice. Like they might lose their ice cream for the night if they choose not to eat their dinner, but you still love them. You're able to take away their ice cream without yelling at them or if you're okay with your own feelings of, oh shoot, I wanted to control this kid. I wanted him to eat his dinner. If you're okay with, no, he gets to choose. If he doesn't want to eat his dinner, that's totally fine. He doesn't get his ice cream then, but that's totally fine. I'm still able to come at my child from a place of love and acceptance and warmth, and no guilt feelings on my part for not letting him have his ice cream. I just wanted to give that little example of how you can actually, quote, discipline your kids, but you don't have to lose any of your love or affection for them.
That's exactly right, and I think it's a contractual cause and effect, right? It's an understanding from the beginning, and actually, if you do that well with your kids, they will agree ahead of time to that type of punishment, right?
Yes, they will.
They say, if you say, okay, I don't want you to use your cell phone at the table. If you use your cell phone at the table, I'm taking it away for a day. Is that, you understand that? Oh yeah, that's fine. Okay, well. There it is. It's already built in. Both sides have accepted it. It shows respect for the child. It takes the burden off the parent. You don't have to become angry to accomplish it. I mean, it's all right there. Now, but I would say, and I really, everybody needs to hear this one. You will do this poorly. Okay? This is hard work.
Yeah.
this is not easy, and very, very few of us grew up with models that worked that way.
Yep.
So don't beat yourself up, if you fail. It's really part of the deal, I think. We grow as we parent. You wish you could be a complete person with everything good in life before you get a kid, but God says, I'm going to use these kids to help you grow up and help you learn some things.
This is your huge, amazing, incredible opportunity and training ground to figure out your own emotional, the areas where you are emotionally deficient, or where you need, I shouldn't say deficient, I should say it's where you have those opportunities to grow.
Yeah.
And your kids will be the ones and your marriage will be the things that help you to see where those are. And then you can do that personal work. But I really do believe that, I know, and it's really sad that the church kind of says, oh, you shouldn't, it's so selfish to focus on yourself. Well, if you don't focus on your own work, your own personal inner work, if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to if you don't have a safe, welcoming place for yourself, you're not going to be able to create safe, welcoming places for anybody else.
Absolutely. It's the same thing as they tell you on the airplane, put your oxygen mask on first, and I tell that to people all the time as I counsel. They say, oh, we've got kids. And I say, well, get yourself healthy first. You've got to focus there first.
How are you liking this episode so far? Dave and I ended up talking longer than we usually do for a single episode, so I decided to break this particular episode up into two. And this part one, we focused a little bit more on parenting. And part two, we do get into more of the conversation about the link between narcissism and legalism. So I hope that you'll come back for episode 68 next week and hear that part two. If you benefit from this podcast, would you do me a huge favor and go over to Apple iTunes and leave a rating and review? You can do it totally anonymously. You can just, you don't have to put your name on there. But here's the thing. When you leave a rating and review on iTunes, they show it to more people then. And that means that more people will get their eyeballs on this opportunity to learn and benefit from this podcast as well. So it's kind of I'm putting this back into your court and saying, hey, help me out here so that we can get this in front of more people, more women of faith who need to hear these messages. Also, I want you to know that this episode of the Flying Free podcast and most of the episodes are sponsored financially by the private Flying Free Sisterhood group. And this community offers courses, expert workshops, and weekly live coaching for women of faith that are looking for hope and healing from emotionally and spiritually abusive relationships and communities. You can find out more and get on the waiting list at joinflyingfree.com. And I want to thank you so much for listening. Until next time, fly free.